Volume 1, Book 2, Chapters 33 through 43 of the Life of Apollonius of Tyana. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Life of Apollonius of Tyana by Flavius Philostratus, translated by F.C. Conybeare. Volume 1, Book 2. Chapter 33. Here Apollonius interrupted and said, "You have exactly played the part of the restored sons of Hercules in the play, and praised be the gods who have helped so noble a man to come by his own, and restored you by their providential intervention. But tell me this about these sages, were they not once actually subject to Alexander? And were they not brought before him to philosophize about the heavens?" He said, "Those were Oxydraci. But this race has always been independent and well equipped for war, and they say that they attempted, yet never acquired, any real knowledge of wisdom. But the genuine sages live between the Hyphasis and the Ganges, in a country which Alexander never reached, not, I imagine, because he was afraid of what was in it, but, I think, because the omens warned him against it. But if he had crossed the Hyphasis, and had been able to take the surrounding country, he could certainly never have taken possession of their castle, in which they live, not even if he had 10,000 like Achilles, and 30,000 like Ajax behind him. For they do not do battle with those who approach them, but they repulse them with prodigies and thunderbolts which they send forth, for they are holy men and beloved of the gods. It is related, anyhow, that Hercules of Egypt and Dionysus, after they had overrun the Indian people with their arms, at last attacked them in company, and that they constructed engines of war, and tried to take the place by assault. But the sages, instead of taking the field against them, lay quiet and passive, as it seemed to be the enemy. But as soon as the latter approached, they were driven off by rockets of fire and thunderbolts which were hurled obliquely from above and fell upon their armor. It was on that occasion, they say, that Hercules lost his golden shield, and the sages dedicate it as an offering, partly out of respect for Hercules' reputation, and partly because of the reliefs upon the shield. For in these, Hercules is represented fixing the frontier of the world at Gadira, and turning the mountains into pillars, and confining the ocean within its boundaries. Thence it is clear that it was not the Theban Hercules, but the Egyptian one, that came to Gadira and fixed the limits of the world. Chapter 34. While they were thus talking, the strain of the hymn sung to the flute fell upon their ears, and Apollonius asked the king what was the meaning of their ode. He answered, "The Indians sing their abominations to the king at the moment of his going to bed, and they pray that he may have good dreams, and rise up propitious and affable towards his subjects." Apollonius said, "And how do you, O king, feel in regard to this matter? For it is yourself, I suppose, that they honor with their pipes." He said, "I don't laugh at them, for I must allow it because of the law, although I do not require any admonition of the kind, for in so far as a king behaves himself with moderation and integrity, he will bestow, I imagine, favors on himself rather than on his subjects." Chapter 35. After this conversation, they laid themselves down to repose. But when the day dawned, the king himself went to the chamber in which Apollonius and his companions were sleeping, and gently stroking the bed, he addressed the sage, and asked him what he was thinking about. He said, "For I don't imagine you are asleep, since you drink water and despise wine." Said the other, "Then you don't think that those who drink water go to sleep?" Said the king, "Yes, they sleep, but with a very light sleep, which just sits upon the tips of their eyelids, as we say, and not upon their minds." Said Apollonius, "Nay, with both do they sleep, and perhaps more with the mind than with the eyelids. For unless the mind is thoroughly composed, the eyes will not admit of sleep either. For note how madmen are not able to go to sleep because their minds leap with excitement, and their thoughts run coursing hither and thither, so that their glances are full of fury and morbid impulse, like those of the dragons who never sleep. He went on, Since then, O king, we have clearly intimated the use and function of sleep, and what it signifies for men, let us examine whether the drinker of water need sleep less soundly than the drunkard. Said the king, Do not quibble, for you put forward the case of a drunkard. He, I admit, will not sleep at all, for his mind is in a state of revel, and whirls him about and fills him with uproar. All, I tell you, who try to go to sleep when in drink, seem to themselves to be rushed up onto the roof, and then to be dashed down to the ground, and to fall into a whirl, as they say happened to Ixion. Now, I do not put the case of a drunkard, but a man who has merely drunk wine, but remains sober. I wish to consider whether he will sleep, and how much better he will sleep than a man who drinks no wine. Chapter 36. Apollonius then summoned Damis, and said, "'Tis a clever man with whom we are discussing, and one thoroughly trained in argument." Damis said, "I see it is so, and perhaps this is what is meant by the phrase, catching a Tartar. But the argument excites me very much, of which he has delivered himself, so it is time for you to wake up and finish it." Apollonius then raised his head slightly and said, "Well, I will prove out of your own lips and following your own argument how much advantage we who drink water have in that we sleep more sweetly. For you have clearly stated and admitted that the minds of drunkards are disordered and are in a condition of madness. For we see those who are under the spell of drink imagining that they see 2 moons at once and 2 suns, while those who have drunk less, even though they are quite sober, while they entertain no such delusions as these, are yet full of exultation and pleasure, and this fit of joy often falls upon them, even though they have not had any good luck, and men in such a condition will plead cases, although they have never opened their lips before in a law court, and they will tell you they are rich, although they have not a farthing in their pockets. For these, O king, are the affections of a madman. For the mere pleasure of drinking disturbs their judgment, and I have known many of them who were so firmly convinced that they were well off, that they were unable to sleep, but leapt up in their slumbers. And this is the meaning of the saying that good fortune itself is the reason for being anxious. Men have also devised sleeping draughts by drinking or anointing themselves, with which people at once stretch themselves out and go to sleep as if they were dead. But when they wake up from such sleep, it is with a sort of forgetfulness, and they imagine that they are anywhere rather than where they are. Now, these draughts are not exactly drunk, but I would rather say that they drench the soul and body, for they do not induce any sound or proper sleep, but the deep coma of a man half dead, or the light and distracted sleep of men haunted by phantoms, even though they be wholesome ones. And you will, I think, agree with me in this, unless you are disposed to quibble rather than argue seriously. But those who drink water, as I do, see things as they really are, and they do not record in fancy things that are not. For they were never found to be giddy, nor full of drowsiness or of silliness, nor unduly elated, but they are wide awake and thoroughly rational, and always the same, whether late in the evening or early in the morning when the market is crowded. For these men never nod, even though they pursue their studies far into the night. For sleep does not drive them forth, pressing down like a slave-holder upon their necks that are bowed down like the wine, but you will find them free and erect, and they go to bed with a clear, pure soul, and welcome sleep, and are neither buoyed up by the bubbles of their own private luck, nor scared out of their wits by any adversity. For the soul meets both alternatives with equal calm, if it be sober and not overcome with either feeling. And that is why it can sleep a delightful sleep, untouched by the sorrows which startle others from their couches. Chapter 37. and more than this, as a faculty of divination by means of dreams, which is the divinest and most godlike of human faculties, the soul detects the truth all the more easily when it is not muddied by wine, but accepts the message unstained and scans it carefully. Anyhow, the explainers of dreams and visions, those whom the poets call interpreters of dreams, will never undertake to explain any vision to anyone without having first asked the time when it was seen. For if it was at dawn, and in the sleep of morning-tide, they calculate its meaning on the assumption that the soul is then in a condition to divine soundly and healthily, because by then it has cleansed itself of the stains of wine. But if the vision was seen in the first sleep or at midnight, when the soul is still immersed in the lees of wine and muddied thereby, they decline to make any suggestions if they are wise. And that the gods also are of this opinion, and that they commit the faculty of oracular response to souls which are sober, I will clearly show. There was, O king, a seer among the Greeks called Amphiaraeus. Said the other, I know, for you allude, I imagine, to the son of Oecles, who was swallowed up alive by the earth on his way back from Thebes. Apollonius said, This man, O king, still divines in Attica, inducing dreams in those who consult him, and the priests take a man who wishes to consult him, and they prevent his eating for 1 day, and from drinking wine for 3, in order that he may imbibe the oracles with his soul in a condition of utter transparence. But if wine were a good drug of sleep, then the wise Amphiaraeus would have bidden his votaries to adopt the opposite regimen, and would have had them carried into his shrine as full of wine as leathern flagons. And I could mention many oracles, held in repute by Greeks and barbarians alike, where the priest utters his response from the tripod after imbibing water and not wine. So you may consider me also as a fit vehicle for the god, O king, along with all who drink water. For we are rapt by the nymphs, and are bacchantic revellers in sobriety. The king said, Well then, you must make me too, O Apollonius, a member of your religious brotherhood. Said the other, I would do so, provided only you will not be esteemed vulgar and held cheap by your subjects. For in the case of a king, a philosophy that is at once moderate and indulgent makes a good mixture, as is seen in your own case. But an excess of rigor and severity would seem vulgar, O king, and beneath your august station, and it might be construed by the envious as due to pride. Chapter 38. When they had thus conversed, for by this time it was daylight, they went out into the open. And Apollonius, understanding that the king had to give audience to embassies and such like, said, You then, O king, must attend to the business of state, but let me go and devote this hour to the sun, for I must needs offer up to him my accustomed prayer. The king said, And I pray he may hear your prayer, for he will bestow his grace on all who find pleasure in your wisdom. But I will wait for you until your return, for I have to decide some cases in which your presence will very greatly help me. Chapter 39. Apollonius then returned, when the day was already far advanced, and asked him about the cases which he was judging. But he answered, Today I have not judged any, for the omens did not allow me. Apollonius then replied and said, It is the case, then, that you consult the omens in such cases as these, just as you do when you are setting out on a journey or a campaign. He said, Yes, by Zeus, for there is a risk in this case of one who is a judge straying from the right line. Apollonius felt that what he said was true, and asked him again what the suit was which he had to decide. He said, For I see that you have given your attention to it, and are perplexed what verdict to give. The king said, I admit that I am perplexed, and that is why I want your advice. For one man has sold to another land, in which there lay a treasure as yet undiscovered, and some time afterwards the land, being broken up, revealed a certain chest, which the person who sold the land says belongs to him rather than to the other, for that he would never have sold the land if he had known beforehand that he had a fortune thereon. But the purchaser claims that he acquired everything that he found in land, which thenceforth was his. And both their contentions are just, and I shall seem ridiculous if I order them to share the gold between them, for any old woman could settle the matter in that way. Apollonius thereupon replied as follows. The fact that they are quarreling about gold shows that these two men are no philosophers. And you will, in my opinion, give the best verdict if you bear this in mind, that the gods attach the first importance and have most care for those who live a life of philosophy together with moral excellence, and only pay secondary attention to those who have committed no faults and were never yet found unjust. Now they entrust to philosophers the task of rightly discerning things divine and human as they should be discerned, but to those who merely are of good character they give enough to live upon, so that they may never be rendered unjust by actual lack of the necessaries of life. It seems then to me, O king, right to weigh these men in the balance, as it were, and to examine their respective lives. For I cannot believe that the gods would deprive the one even of his land, unless he was a bad man, or that they would, on the other hand, bestow on the other even what was under the land, unless he was better than the man who sold it. The two claimants came back the next day, and the seller was convicted of being a ruffian who had neglected the sacrifices, which it was his bounden duty to sacrifice to the gods on that land. But the other was found to be a decent man, and a most devout worshipper of the gods. Accordingly, the opinion of Apollonius prevailed, and the better of the two men quitted the court as one on whom the gods had bestowed this boon. Chapter 40. When the lawsuit had been thus disposed of, Apollonius approached the Indian and said, This is the third day, O king, that you have made me your guest, and at dawn tomorrow I must quit your land in accordance with the law. Said the other, But the law does not yet speak to you thus, for you can remain on the morrow, since you came after midday. Apollonius said, I am delighted with your hospitality, and indeed you seem to me to be straining the law for my sake. The king said, Yes, indeed, and I would I could break it in your behalf. But tell me this, Apollonius, did not the camels bring you from Babylon, which they say you were riding? He said, They did, and Vardan gave them to us. Will they then be able to carry you on after they have come already so many stades from Babylon? Apollonius made no answer, but Damis said, O king, our friend here does not understand anything about our journey, nor about the races among which we shall find ourselves in future. But he regards our passage into India as mere child's play, under the impression that he will everywhere have you and Vardan to help him. I assure you, the true condition of our camels has not been acknowledged to you, for they are in such an evil state that we could carry them rather than they us, and we must have others. For if they collapse anywhere in the wilderness of India, he continued, we shall have to sit down and drive off the vultures and wolves from the camels, and as no one will drive them off from us, we shall perish too. The king answered accordingly and said, I will remedy this, for I will give you other camels, and you need 4, I think, and the satrap ruling the Indus will send back 4 others to Babylon. But I have a herd of camels on the Indus, all of them white. Damis said, And will you not also give us a guide, O king? He answered, Yes, of course, and I will give a camel to the guide and provisions, and I will write a letter to Iarchus, the oldest of the sages, praying him to welcome Apollonius as warmly as he did myself, and to welcome you also as philosophers and followers of a divine man. And forthwith the Indian gave them gold and precious stones, and linen, and 1,000 other such things. And Apollonius said that he had enough gold already, because Vardan had given it to the guide on the sly, but that he would accept the linen robes, because they were like the cloaks worn by the ancient and genuine inhabitants of Attica. And he took up one of the stones, and said, O rare stone, how opportunely have I found you, and how providentially! Detecting in it, I imagine, some secret and divine virtue. Neither would the companions of Damis accept for themselves the gold. Nevertheless, they took good handfuls of the gems, in order to dedicate them to the gods, whenever they should regain their own country. Chapter 41. So they remained the next day as well, for the Indian would not let them go, and he gave them a letter for Iarchus, written in the following terms. King Phraotes, to Iarchus his master, and to his companions, all hail! Apollonius, wisest of men, yet accounts you still wiser than himself, and is come to learn your lore. Send him away, therefore, when he knows all that you know yourselves, assured that nothing of your teaching will perish, for in discourse and memory he excels all men. And let him also see the throne on which I sat, when you, Father Iarchus, bestowed on me the kingdom. And his followers too deserve commendation for their devotion to such a master. Farewell to yourself and your companions. Chapter 42. And they rode out of Taxila, and after a journey of 2 days reached the plain, on which Porus is said to have engaged Alexander. And they say they saw gates therein that enclosed nothing, but had been erected to carry trophies. For there was set up on them a statue of Alexander standing in a 4-poled chariot, as he looked when at Issus he confronted the satraps of Darius. And at a short distance from one another there are said to have been built 2 gates, carrying the one a statue of Porus, and the other one of Alexander, of both, as I imagine, reconciled to one another after the battle. For the one is in the attitude of one man greeting another, and the other of one doing homage. Chapter 43. And having crossed the river Hydraotes, and passed by several tribes, they reached the Hyphasis, and 30 stades away from this they came on altars bearing the inscription, To Father Ammon and Hercules his brother, and to Athena Providence, and to Zeus of Olympus, and to the Cabiri of Samothrace, and to the Indian Sun, and to the Delphian Apollo. And they say there was also a brass column dedicated and inscribed as follows, Alexander stayed his steps at this point. The altars we may suppose to be due to Alexander, who so honored the limit of his empire, but I fancy the Indians beyond the Hyphasis erected the column by way of expressing their pride at Alexander's having gone no further. End of Volume 1, Book 2, Chapters 33 through 43.